Hey associates! All right, so this lecture is about really getting deeper into design and organization, and how our design is really going to play off of, right, our structure and our editing. And so for technical writers, business writers, especially, again, since our audience, our key goal is helping somebody complete a task, make a decision, like really find and get information, we need, great, clear, crisp writing that's well edited, good content, and that has to be combined with really strong design and the way we actually organize our whole page layout, so that way somebody can scan, find, remember, and sort of get the information that they need. So today we're really going to focus on some of these key design principles that are going to help us make better products and documents for our audience. Over there. All right. And so there's kind of three things that we're really going to focus on today. First is going to be, just some concepts. And a lot of these concepts, you're going to say, oh, yeah, I feel like I knew that. I just didn't know that's what it was called. And that totally makes sense. It's normal. A lot of these are going to be things that you've maybe been intuitively doing, or you recognize when it works or it doesn't. So today we're going to talk about why and give you some of the language to then make sure you are intentionally doing it instead of kind of instinctually doing it. Then we're just going to talk about the choices that we can make based on those concepts to increase our design effectiveness. And then last, we will kind of wrap up with some tools that are available to you, or to us as designers. And one, major sort of side note, and this is 2000 level, kind of an introduction to these design principles. So, if you hear something that really interests you, you can go down a very deep, really cool rabbit hole and learn a lot more about it. And if you are going to become, a designer or a writer for your main career goal, then of course you'll be taking more upper division classes that gets to focus all semester, right, on these concepts instead of our task, which is learn a little bit about a lot of stuff, just to help you overall, as a communicator and writer in technical areas in the workplace. So if you love it, there's more classes and way more information you can get about every single one of these topics. So just kind of focus on the big picture so that way you know how to apply these in kind of any situation, just to be an overall stronger writer, even if you're not going to be a writer as your career. All right. So, as far as concepts, again, you have been reading technical documents kind of your whole lives. Really, like, assignment sheets are a form of technical documents. If you've, ever had to build furniture, right, you get instruction sets. If you read blog posts, on LinkedIn or from your favorite brand, that's kind of technical professional writing. Emails, we have been surrounded by these things. And so a lot of these principles, hopefully you'll say, oh yeah, I've seen a time when that was used really well. Oh, I've seen a time when that was not used very well. Oh, I have always thought I should do this. I just didn't know why. And so definitely these should connect to things that you have seen and been doing and experienced out sort of in your wild. Also, all these principles are kind of based on sort of an inherent, like, aesthetic kind of quality, something we do with design, though it's deeper than just making it look pretty, but using these principles and these qualities effectively will make your documents look better. And so a lot of things, again, are going to be like, yes, this looks good. And we kind of have a sense of it. And of course, people who I might say, like, oh, I have always just been, a very good writer or a good designer, right? Those of you who might go into those tracks maybe have just a little bit stronger, like, eye for what looks good and are naturally applying these principles a little bit more. And for others of you that aren't quite as confident, right now you'll have the language and the tools and the information behind the choices to help you kind of create those stronger documents as well. So that's kind of the goal as we go through all of these terms. So, the background of all of these concepts, we have to go back to camping. All right. So camp is the context of the situation. C for context. A for audience. Remember, what's their deal? When are they going to use it? Why do they need the thing that you're writing? We're not doing it just because we like to write, right? We're not doing it for our own kind of kicks and giggles. We are creating and writing and sending these documents out into the world to serve a purpose based on the context, the audience. We have to think about the message and what needs to be said. Again, don't write for the sake of it. We need to think about what has to be included, right, in the content, in the message. And then last, what product or medium, or potentially a mixture, is going to be best to deliver that message for the audience in the context. So as we go into design, right, we think about design while we write our content. So, the message is part of it. But all of our design choices do need to kind of go back to the audience in the purpose, right? So camping influences design, the context of the situation, the audience's deal, what we are actually trying to say in the products that we have available to us. Do you need to write for a website that has a little bit different application to design than if you are writing, a grant submission? All of those go together to figure out what design choices we should be making. So no matter what, make sure you keep camp in mind: context, audience, message, product. All right, top 3, kind of 3.5 concepts that you definitely need to remember and keep in mind here. And so the first is going to be this idea of proximity and alignment. And with proximity, alignment, we're really just talking about how 2 different items are related to each other. So proximity says, okay, things that are close together must be connected somehow. Right? So if you want to make sure the audience recognizes that, this symbol is about proximity and alignment, we want to make sure, it's close to that heading, right? If I put it way over here, right, we understand contrast, this picture must have to do with this thing because it's closer to this than it's closer to that. Now, the other half of it is alignment. So you might say, well, the repetition symbol is also close to it. That's where alignment comes in, where we say, oh, but all of these are with a nice vertical line, right? There's a little bit of color distinction going on. And so the alignment says, okay, things that are underneath the main heading and close to it must be connected. Another example where you'll see this a lot is in a bulleted list, right? So the bullet points that are close together, we understand those make up one list, right? And the alignment tells us this is a main task, and then we, indent in for a subtask, right? So that's kind of your anchor point to remember: proximity and alignment. Imagine your bullet list as a great example of that. So proximity, alignment, how close together, what is the relationship of the items on your page? Repetition is just about creating consistency in visual patterns. We like to be consistent because it helps our readers navigate the document more readily, more quickly. So you don't want to constantly be changing what your headings look like. But we also want to make sure that main headings all look the same, and then that subheadings look the same to each other, but different from the main headings. And that looks different from the main, paragraph text. So repetition creates a visual pattern. As readers, we like patterns. We're looking for them to help us find the information. And then the last big one, contrast, that you'll use no matter what level of writing and designing you're at. Your documents will get better if you use some contrast. Again, contrast is just making different elements stand out from each other. So yes, contrast is applied with specific colors, and we'll talk about contrast tools, but contrast as a principle also just means this thing looks different from this other thing, and that's how I tell that they are unique. So with these 3 elements together, it basically makes our document easy to skim, locate information, read that information, and remember the content. So we want to kind of think about all of them as we're deciding where to put elements on the page and what decisions to make. Now, none of those work without this concept of white space. White space doesn't have to be white. It really just refers to the negative space or the empty space on the page. So all of this, right, is white space. And white space is important because it tells us, okay, this is close together, this is different, this is unique. So without white space, right, we can't really tell the relative proximity of things, right? White space tells us, oh, this is closer than this other thing without the white space. Negative space also helps things like contrast, right, work better as well. So don't sleep on white space. Just think of it as anything that you don't have stuff on your page. And we really need white space to let the other design principles work. We need white space to kind of let our page breathe and make it possible for people to navigate and not feel so overwhelmed. So, as a really kind of great example here, we're going to be looking through the next few things and see how like the design transforms. So this is going to be the exact same copy, so the same text, the same words, content, but with different design features applied, so we can kind of see that impact. Now, very first, at the line level. So there's no what we would consider macro design applied, right? It's just a page of text, and that's it. Not very exciting, kind of overwhelming. You're like, oh, what am I even about to read here? But at the line level, we actually can still see all of these being applied. So let's just go through them real quick. So we understand, right, letter forms and words because of white space, right? And so we know, okay, this is a single letter because there's some negative space around it, right? And we know the shape of that letter because of the white space, you know, on each side of the lines, right? So letters, like characters, only work because of white space, right? And contrast, right? The difference between the white space and where the line is contrast in action. We also are able to read, right? Because of things like contrast between letters. So we know a W looks like this and an O looks like that, right? They look different. There's contrast between them. But there's also repetition, right? We know this is a W and this is a W because they look the same. They follow the same visual pattern. And then proximity allows us to see words, right? So these three letters, H-O-W, are closer together. We understand them to be connected as a single word. Then we have a little extra white space, and now a new grouping of letters with proximity, right? Closeness to them. So even at this small level, right, we see those design principles working to help us read. And I bring it up because as you get more advanced as a writer, you definitely might, or you can, play around with the design even at that line level. We are able to change things like the leading, basically the white space around words and the alignment and stuff. But for like this class and just kind of generally becoming a stronger writer, you don't necessarily need to worry about that. Going with the standard fonts, we'll get into font choices, are going to be fine. But just kind of remember that these concepts are what let us actually read words on a page, and we are able to kind of change those. But let's focus on the macro design. So how can we turn this paragraph into something, you know, a little bit more helpful, a little bit more appealing, and easier to actually kind of see and read, right? Because, this is just like one big thing. Like, I don't want to skim that. Now I'm annoyed. I'm going to miss out on good information. So one thing that we can do, right, is apply contrast and repetition even more fully here. And so when we say, okay, how can we, you know, support you? So in this case, it's like, okay, we have bold, UCCS, you know, Chancellor's Award happening, and then we have repetition. So, okay, this is a type of award, this is a type of award, or type of, you know, financial aid and support. So already a little bit of contrast using the bolding, you know, helps us navigate, skim, find the information a little bit better, but it's still like a lot to get through. It's still a little bit overwhelming, still a high likelihood of somebody being like, nope, I don't want to engage with that and missing out on important information. And so the next thing we really want to do is actually break up our information into more digestible pieces. And we use paragraphs, right? That's how we basically break up things like this. But for technical writing, we actually use overall, I'd say probably more paragraphs per page than things like literary writing. And that's because our kind of definition of a paragraph is a little bit different. So here's kind of the 4 paragraphs. So again, when you break it up into paragraphs, right, it's not about the amount of sentences. So when you're doing literary writing, there's kind of a tendency of, okay, a paragraph, right, it has at least sort of 4 to 5 sentences, and there's kind of to help you start learning how to write stronger, we tend to encourage more information basically in a single paragraph. And that's great, right? It's part of a learning tool. But now for technical business writing, we have to unlearn and just adjust a little bit. And so in this case, right, paragraphs are thought of as content, right? So it's not about how much, like it's not measured by size, it's measured by content. And when you finish that theme of content, then new paragraph, right? Then stop talking, stop writing, and have a new paragraph. So that's where we get things like, okay, technically this paragraph is only 1 sentence long, but that's all that needs to be said, right, in this kind of case. Whereas this paragraph, right, is a couple of sentences because there's just more that needed to be said to explain, you know, these opportunities. So think about breaking it up into more paragraphs, and already it's easier to navigate, right? We have more white space between the sections, a little more flow, direction as a reader, right? My eyes can now travel down this nice, like, aligned page to find the basically headings that I want. And then I can just focus on reading this small snippet of information and not try to like process and remember a whole giant page of text at once. So if nothing else, your writing will improve if you really focus on your content and breaking it up by content and basically adding more paragraphs. All right, so now we've transformed the base copy into a website to really look at all of this macro design. Right, so this all came from the financial aid website. And, right, this goes into that final product, right? We know it's a website, so we have all these kind of options that we can see and play with, though this could very easily be turned into other media forms as well. So with our base content in mind, right, we see white space, right? All this negative space in between the boxes, and white space doesn't have to be white. So these gray boxes here, all this black right here, that is examples of our white space that basically tells us here's these different sections, helps tell us where to look. And we recognize there's 2 kind of themes of content happening. Proximity, alignment. Okay, we know that everything contained inside of this white box must be grouped together, and it's close to the Chancellor's Award. So this paragraph has to do with that. This button, you know, is contained within the box and closest to this. So if I click on it, I'll get more information about the Chancellor's Award. And because of proximity alignment, we recognize this, right, is a different set of information than the scholarship. Right, we recognize that student employment information, that button, is not going to tell us more about this award because it's closer to and contained within, you know, these opportunities for hardworking students. Things like repetition, right, notice that all of these headings, the award names, right, look the same, but then look different from this heading 1, basically. And that's just how like headings and structure work. So when we talk about, okay, your heading should be the same, so that way we can jump down to the biggest theme of content, and then your subheading should look different from your main headings, but look the same across, so that way people can find all of the subheadings. And then contrast, things look different, and it helps kind of draw our eye in. Other things we added here, things like this image, help me say, okay, wow, I see things like customer service. It seems to be a student, kind of helps prime my reading, my information to be like, oh, this must be about, work study or being able to work on campus. So all of these things are really coming together on the page to help guide the reader, and certainly finding your information is a lot easier, right, with all of this design and guidance and support than, our original paragraph, which it's like, oh my, like how can I find just these scholarship? I have to read everything. Basically, don't make your audience read everything. Make it so your audience can skim and find just the little bits of information that they want to read, and give them the option to read more when necessary. Now, part of that kind of give them the option to read more goes into 3 other concepts to keep in mind. And again, these are always going to work and be enhanced with proximity, alignment, repetition, contrast, and white space. So the first one about chunking just tells the reader like what information is basically contained, like what is a unit of information. So it's going to be a nice chunk. So think paragraphs, right? They represent a chunk of super related info and details about your topic, sentence, your theme. So make sure you have lots of chunks going on, easier for people to read. Cueing, this idea of cueing is just the order of information. So for our genres of writing, we definitely can expect our audience to like hop all around. Again, they're scanning, they're looking for the info that they want. But we can apply design to try to help them see the flow of the information and help them in that process. And so we can use design to kind of tell the reader's eye where to go, where to look first, and that's where colors, symbols, headings all come into play, are super helpful to just direct the reader to kind of our information cue to better remember, understand the content, kind of read it in this order. And then filtering is just how we contain our types of information so that readers can like locate what they want. So finding is definitely more unique to technical business writing than chunking and cueing. Like chunking, cueing definitely appears in our more literary styles, just a different application of it. But filtering is really a little bit more unique to us, just because our readers are very rarely interested in reading every word in kind of that linear cue that we set up. Instead, they want to filter and find the type of information that they're interested in. So we use our chunks and our cues, to help with that filtering so they can quickly see, okay, this is the introduction, this is the instruction set, this is where the graphs are, jumping around to what they actually want and need to read. So if we go back to our our website real quick, we can see, right, these chunks, cues, and filters showing up here as well. So chunks of information, I can decide I want to just read about this one award. I want to read about just this award. The cue, recommending where my eyes should go. Now, bright spots, growth areas. This is a great page. Again, all these principles are showing up. One thing we might change is back to the content. Maybe instead of how we support you, it might be a little bit more helpful in terms of cueing and filtering for this, right, to say something more along the lines of, scholarship awards or one-time awards, or even just like awards, because how we support you is kind of doesn't tell me exactly that I'm about to read about like scholarship type things, whereas this one does tell me, okay, something about working, right? But the headings allow me to see, okay, here's my cue. Boom, heading 1, okay, now I know that I'm going to read about these awards. Boom, heading 2 cues it up. This image also helps cue up, hey, where do I want to look? Pretty picture, we love looking at pictures. Oh, the picture is about somebody working. Okay, now I'm queued up, primed to understand, hey, I'm about to read about work study. And then filters, really telling the difference between things like buttons, copy text, allowing me to read more if I want to, more info about the Chancellor's Award, right? Great example of filtering, so we don't give people more information than they need in the moment, but the opportunity to get the information that they want. All right, so those are kind of the really, really big ones. Now, let's go into a few other concepts to keep in mind. So, margins. A margin is the white space, basically around. We love margins for a couple of reasons. Again, if you become a technical writer, or you go, more advanced, or you become like a graphic designer or something, you are gonna maybe play around with the margins more, learn more about them. But for like this class, and for most of us who just want to write a little bit clearer, a little bit better, as just part of a job, but not our actual jobs, don't mess with the margins too much, right? Our kind of standard margins, which are about an inch all around the page, are great. They're fine. We really don't need to mess with them. But there might be times, especially when we get into our longer reports or things that have like a lot of graphs and visuals, where we do want to adjust the margins to make sure it all fits on the page. So that way things like proximity, right? Our graph doesn't get broken up from its main content. So if you do need to change the margin, I'd say stick with at least 0.75 or a ½ inch on kind of the sides. But make sure no matter what that you keep a margin. Do not recommend ever going to the narrow setting. And there's a few reasons why we want to keep margins and avoid the super narrow setting. Okay, so first, they limit the amount of text, right? So one thing, again, we don't necessarily, right, want to go with, there we go. We don't necessarily want to go with super narrow margins because we have a tendency to write way too much content for our readers. So having some margins forces us to break it up more, have better chunks, have better filters. So that's one reason. Second, space for binding. So maybe you don't ever have to print it out. That's definitely a reality I wouldn't be surprised by. But let's say, right, your context and your audience, maybe they will be using this document at a time when they do actually need to print it or it needs to be bound. Maybe, it's for something in like a wet area where you can have electronics or a field setting or, I don't know, a kitchen. For some reason, you need to print it out for them. If you don't have any margins when you print it, right, your staples or whatever binding you use is going to mess up the text to make it hard to read. Kind of off that note, it protects the type. So basically the letters aren't going to be cut off, which could still happen even in digital formats, right? If it goes all the way to the edge of, the screen, and the like platform that you're using, right? You might miss out on some information. And then last, space for comments, notes. Again, you're going to be maybe working in a very intergenerational workforce. Maybe people are going to want to print out your work so they can take notes and write on it. I also often print stuff out that I really care about, so that way I can make notes and comments on kind of a printed medium, circle things, scratch things out. So margins are good. Big picture here. Don't get rid of your margins. We have a lot of reasons why we like them. All right, now some of the fun concepts, right? I definitely love, typography. So typography, right, is our font kind of decisions. It's super fun, but it's also easy to kind of go too far and get a little bit too like cheeky and creative and forget, right, our camp. Always go back to our camp, right? Think of it as our base camp. Context, audience, message, and then the final product all are going to impact the typography that we might end up choosing. So, with our kind of typography is like the biggest sort of the study of font, of letters, basically. Font and typeface are not the same thing. right? So when you say, oh, I decided to use this font, what you actually are referring to is the kind of final visual product that's a combination of your typeface, your type family, and then also the size that you're choosing. And so just know that your headings are a different font than your main paragraphs, because your headings visually look different. They might be bigger and bolded, even if they're the same typeface, they're a different font. It doesn't matter a ton, but just know if you're talking about the overall kind of final thing that I'm looking at, those are the fonts, and there's multiple fonts on a page. And if you're talking about the actual design of the characters, that's your typeface. And then type family is a variation of the typeface. So on this slide, everything on here is the same typeface. It's called IBM Plex Sans. But then here we have different families of it. So this is like the bold family of this typeface. This is the italics family of this typeface. So mostly you'll be making decisions about the type families. And we don't want to get too much, going on the page, right? Too many typefaces, too many type families can get a little bit overwhelming and start cluttering your design. Cool. All right, so your font choice changes the layout of the page. And again, I say font because it's both the typeface, but also the type family and the size that you are using. So on this page, we have all these different typefaces kind of going on and happening. But then we also have, they're all 80 points, so they're all the same size, but even then they're taking up different amounts of space on the page. And so that's why these concepts are so important. Now, the two main things to keep in mind as far as concepts for typography is going to be a serif versus a sans serif. So a sans serif is becoming more and more the standard. We use it a lot on websites, and now it's showing up more and more in print. And so a sans serif just means that it doesn't have the little like doodads basically on the ends of the letter forms. That's called a serif. So in this case, we have rubato in a sans serif form, and then we actually have a serifed version, or sort of semi-serifed version of rubato. You can see there's more little like feet. And then a true serif font is this Merriweather. That's your first kind of concept. Serif has the little like feet on them. Once upon a time, we thought it was easier to read those because there's maybe more distinction. But more recent kind of research and just the way our culture has changed, not so true anymore, because we've just all gotten very used to seeing and reading sans serif font. Is our first choice. The biggest thing that you want to think about, though, especially for technical writers and business folks, all you accounting folks, anytime we're going to be using a lot of numbers, you probably want to go with more of a sans serif. And the reason is because we can see how different, right, the letters look. Often with serif fonts, we have more variation in the size and how much space each letter takes up. We can see in our sans serif, right, all very uniform. So if you're typing these into a table, it wouldn't like mess up the layout as much. Whereas if you're going with a serif font, suddenly your 3s are going to be all misaligned and way bigger than your 2s. And again, these are all in the same 80 points. I don't know, they just look a lot different and have a little bit more kind of flair and roundness to them. Then other types of typeface categories. And so we have things like Courier. I personally like Courier, right? It's basically typewriter print. And so I like to use it as my kind of decorative font, because it kind of just calls back to my like sort of journalism interests and roots, as well as screenwriting. We see it a lot. But the thing with these ones, they're called basically like a monotype. but they're really great when consistency is the thing that you need most. And so one reason we use these types of fonts in coding, you'll probably see a lot of that, as well as things like screenwriting, screenplays, is because they're super consistent. And so it basically fits always the same amount of characters on a single page, which just makes it a lot easier to know. For example, in a film, kind of a page of text written in something in like a Courier or a mono stat typeface is about a minute to like read and play out. So that's one reason why you might see that. Then we have specific fonts being developed. This Atkinson Hyperlegible was created with the Braille Institute, and they really focused on different letter form distinctions to try to make it as accessible friendly as possible. And so I did use this for a while, and I do like it, but the problem with new fonts, and there's constantly new fonts being developed, is that some platforms, couldn't like save it, protect it. Like my PDFs were constantly changing the font, even though I had it installed for Adobe, and it just like wouldn't show up in a lot of places. So always be on the lookout for really cool, like new fonts and the reasons they're created. But until they get kind of wider adoption, sometimes it can be a little bit tough to download new ones. And then we have our decorative fonts. So two different types of basically handwritten script fonts, which can just be really great for decorative purposes or just really emphasizing certain words. But just like it's not that fun to read cursive or somebody's handwriting sometimes. Same goes for our font choices. It's just going to be that much more hard to read if you have your entire, copy written in a handwriting. It can be a little tiresome. And again, we don't have very uniform numbers here. These are all actually the 80-point version of these fonts. We can see the handwriting especially is the least consistent font. We love it. All right. So now that we've gone through all the basic concepts for our choices, we do want to start to kind of think about what choices we can make because of these concepts. And we do have a lot of choices that we can make as writers and designers. But the biggest thing to remember is all of our choices are in pursuit of one common goal, and that is to help the reader. All right? Technical writing, business writing, professional writing, very much not about us as writers. It's not, hey, I want to make sure that you see that I can do this or that I can say that. No, instead it is much more of what do you need, right? We're very reader focused, very obsessed with our readers. And so you might be inclined to think like, okay, well, why can't the reader just read it? Like, isn't that their job just to read what I write? And honestly, let's just unpack that for a second. Do you just read everything in the syllabus, even though you know it's about class and important? Right? Do you always just read all of the assignment instructions, announcements, emails that you get? Like, no, probably not. That's like, even I don't read every word of every email that I get, right? It's just, readers are just not going to do that. And so as writers, we need to be aware of that and kind of work around it. And so every choice that we make is about increasing the likelihood of the audience getting the information that they need, right? We just want to increase the likelihood of it. And so the choices we make should help our document make a good impression. Again, if it looks overwhelming or intimidating, or like it's just going to be a lot of work for them to access, the likelihood of them reading it goes down dramatically. So yeah, we want to make it look nice. Pretty things increase the likelihood of somebody reading it. But we also want to make sure that our choices show the structure and the hierarchy, right? So if somebody can really clearly see the order it should go in and what it's going to be structured like, what they're going to encounter, and can anticipate that increases the likelihood that they will actually read it. We want to make choices that direct readers, right, to the information. Again, if they know where to look and they feel like they have some control over how they're going to read it, that increases the likelihood that they will actually read it. We want to make choices that help readers understand the information we're presenting. Right? So if we can make some choices that helps them be like, okay, yeah, I do understand what you're talking about, increases the likelihood that they'll follow through. And then choices that make the information more memorable as well. So they can go back and find it later. But also that creates some connections for them to retain the information so they don't have to go and look at it so much. And so one thing that we definitely are thinking about, again, it's about increasing the likelihood of getting the information to the audience. So if we think maybe you have a form right at work and you realize, you know what, there's like a 30% error rate or like a non-submission rate or something with your document, you might go back and say, okay, how is it designed and how can we, decrease the amount of errors? 0%, which would mean every single person is reading it and doing it correctly. It might be ambitious. It might not be possible. I mean, maybe you're in a situation where that has to be the case. Very high stakes. Again, that goes back to your context and your audience. But for most sort of documents we're creating or things that we're writing for people, having every single person read it is just probably not going to happen. But instead, maybe we can get, the errors of people forgetting to do one thing on the form from 30% down to 10% with better design, right? And that definitely shows, okay, this is more effective. And then maybe we can get that rate from 10% of people not reading it or not filling it out correctly down to only 5%, errors. That's even better design. So our goal here, these choices that we're making, it's about increasing the likelihood that our audience is actually going to read it, understand it, remember it, and then complete the task or follow, the directions, the information that we are providing them. All right, so some kind of specific choices that we can make built on that. And this table is linked in the reference sway for you. It's from the Markle and Selber Practical Strategies textbook. If you like having, a table to reference, but just some specific choices that we can make. And then I'm going to talk again about how all of these principles and choices show up on the page of this textbook itself. Textbooks are great places to go and explore these concepts. So first, if you want to do things like symbolize actions or ideas, icons are great. Not a place to be super cheeky with your icons though. So the deal with an icon is that an icon basically represents the action or the idea, and it's like pretty clear, pretty literal. There are different types and classifications of icons. Again, those of you going into an actual info design track, you'll learn more about them. Everybody else, doesn't really matter that much. Just know that if you pick an icon, it should kind of inherently show the idea, so that way the most people can understand, right? So don't get too abstract with your icons, right? So in this case, it's like YouTube. The icon is just literally the logo. That's always a great principle, right? An icon of a book should look like a book, right? So just make it really easy for people to kind of understand. So symbols are great. Again, color is going to be a great choice to draw attention, guide the eye down, really increase that contrast. But just make sure that you don't only use color to do it. Maybe it's color and a symbol, right? In this case, symbol plus color to show the links and what links have been clicked on. Dividers, tabs are really good for that chunking and filtering principle, right? So we can flip to the sections that we want. Even in digital forms, we can set up tabs and buttons and links to help people get to the info. And then to show related information, what they're talking about here with cross-referencing, are just making sure that, in the content or maybe in like a side bubble or something that you draw, be like, oh, you can refer to this reading, look at this image, see this table, refer to the graph. Literally just tell people, here's where you can find more information. And then things like headers and page numbering all are just really good choices to make to help people find where they want to go. So on this page kind of itself, right, we see things like page numbers over here. Well, this is the chapter 7. Here's the page number. Right, so again, we love page numbers because we can just say, hey, turn to page 7 if you're in a meeting and they're reading a report, right? Look at page 158, right, in this textbook. So see that showing up. We also see filtering happening, and they use color and a number, right? So we know everything in chapter 7 is about designing documents, and everything with this red color is about chapter 7, right? So we use color and a secondary, just in case I can't see or recognize the color, to be able to see the different sections of the book, right? We have like orange and purples and blues, all different colors there. Then we also have good cueing, right? So if I want to, kind of the top of the header kind of cues me to like read down the examples, you know, the reason, the example. And then using, again, color as well as some white space to show the different sections of the table. So all of these principles are applied to make this table more readable. And imagine if this was just written in one big paragraph, you know, how much that would be to read and how intimidating. You'd probably be like, ugh, I don't want to read that. But when they set it up in a table with like color and, you know, good examples and images, they have some good cueing and structure. It's easy for us to skip around and find what we actually want to read, right? Increases the likelihood that we actually use this table. So that's what you want to keep in mind with your choices. A few other choices kind of circling back around to font. These examples come from this book, Killer Visual Strategies, which is linked in this way, and we'll definitely like read sections of that book later in the semester too. But it's really good about like infographics when we talk about some of those things. But big picture as far as our choices that we can make about type family. So remember, type family is the variations of a single text. So are you bolding it? There's variations of typefaces that are thinner or thicker or condensed if you actually go in and change these settings. And they tend to mean something. So if we want it to be important, right, the choices we might make are to bold it, right? It draws people's eye. We kind of have also been trained as readers to see bold as important or sort of loud on the page. If you wanted to also be more like in motion, draw our eye, you might instead use italics, also important, but like maybe less important, right? And so there's kind of these different themes. And there is a lot of like research. People have tested kind of audience perceptions about different typefaces and type families that you can, again, do deep dives into the history of that research, and it's pretty cool. But just know this is kind of where that instinct kind of comes into play. Look at the different typeface, look at the type family, try to imagine your reader, your context, be like, okay, you know, what might they be getting out of this? And different typefaces do kind of convey something, right? Our sans serifs tend to be very neutral and also kind of modern, right? They really came up with our digital era, whereas our serif, Times New Roman, has kind of a timeless edge because it reminds us of like older books, right? Any kind of handwriting can be seen as more casual versus more scripts tend to be seen as very like elegant and kind of uppity, just like when we see cursive. It's like, well, we never use cursive unless we really want to like, I don't know, show off some type of way, right? And so you can kind of just see all these different types of typeface kind of have a different feel and vibe, and changing just the typeface can really change the way somebody approaches your design in your document. So those are some choices to make, right? What do you want that feeling to be? Okay, and then a few other choices that we need to keep in mind is really about how accessible we want our content to be. Every reader is going to benefit from good choices in these areas, right? The idea of things like universal design It came out a lot of like architecture and has made its way now to even things like info design. It's like, if we design it to be easy to read for anybody, that includes people with disabilities, but then that also is going to make it easier to read for everybody, right? So instead of like special accommodations, let's just make it accessible to begin with, and then everybody is kind of covered, and it helps everyone. So some things that you can do. Provide alt text. Alternative text or alt text on an image basically is just a description that you put in, and we'll talk about how to do it in workshop in Word. But you put the alt text in, and it just describes what's happening in the image. That way a screen reader, can go through and describe what that image is. And this is going to include even our graphs and our tables if they get inserted as an image as well. So alt text with a great caption tells the reader exactly what's up, even if they can't see it very clearly. And again, we talk about this with things like disabilities, but also consider, what if, your image is blurry or grainy or something happens when you save it. If you have good alt text, then everybody can go to the alt text and see what that image is about and read a good caption and see what that image is about. Tagging our headings and paragraphs is also great for accessibility, again, for screen readers. So I'll show you how to do that in Word with our styles. Most website builders are going to have options for you to tag, and just make sure that you actually tag headings, H1, H2, H3, H4, normal text or paragraph. Tag it correctly and appropriately and consistently, so that way the structure shows up correctly for people using screen readers, but then also make sure that our visual formats are consistent and the same for people who are visually engaging with your materials. So don't manually do it with like the paintbrush feature. We actually have a tool to correctly tag it, and it makes sure that everything looks consistent. When you're linking, we love a good hyperlink, but instead of saying, click here, give us the context, right? The business's hours of operations, right? And then I click on it and it goes to the page of the hours of operations, not just like our hours, click here, right? So just have a little bit more context, tends to go a lot better. You can hear Gatsby in the background, getting very excited, I think. All right. And then we also want to rely on color and another contrast element, again, just in case somebody can't see the color as clearly, that there's something else. So in this example, right, we know that this arrow and this arrow are the same because they look the same, but they're also the same color, which is different than this arrow, which has the extra dashed line, right? So we're using color, blue versus gray, plus, this extra dashed line to make them look different. So think about color plus another contrast, especially on things like graphs, charts, pie charts, that kind of thing. I know there's a lot of choices we can make. We've gone over a lot of concepts. We're almost there. The biggest thing that will instantly improve your work, even if you're like, I'm just going to be writing generally, is to ask yourself, is your document easy to scan? Does this choice make it easier to scan? Is your document clear to read? Does this choice make your document clearer to read? So if you just ask those two questions and act on them and let them be kind of your lighthouse, your guide, all of your documents are going to improve in quality, and your readers will thank you for it kind of instantly. Now the last choice is getting feedback, right? So user testing, big piece of improving the design of a document, right? So obviously in class, I give you feedback, recommendations, things to revise. And then when you're out, in other situations, try to build in some of that feedback and user testing, on your own, just to make sure that your documents turn out really good. So, some ways that we can get this feedback, right? We could, observe people trying to find the information, so even if you just give your document to your friend, your roommate in this class, can they find the information, right? You give them the scenario of the project, you give them your product, watch them, interact with it, that can be a really good signal of what you might want to change, different decisions. Revision and feedback is part of being a good writer, right? So in my class, going to the writing center, giving your paper to your friend or a roommate, that's not like cheating or anything. That's literally part of being a good writer, is creating the thing, getting some user testing, getting some feedback, and then changing and revising based on the feedback that you receive. That's how good writers work. So you could watch people try to find the information. You could have, give them your paper or email or whatever it is and ask them to try and recall or explain the information to see if, we made it easy to remember and understand. And if they explain it correctly, that's a pretty good sign that your document is achieving the goal. We can also do things in the bigger picture, like document changes in behavior, or even do what we call A/B testing, which basically helps us see which version performs better. So in that kind of scenario of where we needed to just increase the likelihood of people reading it. So again, if document A has a 15% error rate and document B has an 8% error rate, right? Then document B probably has a better design. Something about it is increasing the likelihood that people are reading it and actually acting accordingly. So you can document changes, do some version testing, and then move forward with that feedback. But the big picture here is that feedback is good. Feedback is essential. Feedback is what helps us make better stuff. So build into your process some time to get a little bit of feedback and revise our work. And sometimes we have to give ourselves the feedback, right? And so I definitely also encourage you to kind of almost pre-grade, right? You have the rubric. The rubrics will all be available on Canvas, as you're submitting stuff, especially your major projects. So take a look at the rubric and then kind of go through and try to think like a reader. Try not to think like the writer. Try to think like a reader. Did I do this? Is this easy to find? Can I read that? Does this make sense? Does this color actually contribute something? Does this graph show something? What does this symbol mean? Why do I have this icon? Ask yourself all of those questions as if you are reading your document for the first time, and then build in that revision process. Great things still have growth areas, still have things that can be improved, and stuff that isn't working very well still has bright spots that we need to identify and focus on. So feedback is kind of critical in the writing process. All right, we're almost there. You're hanging in there, hooray. So this could be another place to just pause if you haven't paused. Stretch, take a little bit of a break, but we are almost done. So we're going to wrap up with some tools. All these tools are linked in the reference sway for you. And if you are able to follow along, I do just encourage you to do so, that we will play with some of these tools in class as well. And there's an endless amount of tools. So I'm just going to go over kind of 4 specific things that, again, no matter what type of writing you'll be doing at work, will probably be helpful or you might encounter. And so first we're going to talk about what style guides are, and then font kits, and how to kind of get new fonts if you need them, and some resources for more on font choices. Sketching is kind of a specific strategy, and then Adobe Color. All are things that really come into play for writers, no matter what kind of writing and design you're doing. All right, so first, style guides are basically the explanation of things like color. It could be things like, grammar expectations, language, and then also formatting. You might have a style guide at the industry level, like this IEEE, APA, but you can also have it at the company and organizational level too. And so with style guides, we need to first figure out, again, context. Remember, always go back to your base camp. Context, audience, message, product. Style guides are part of that context because we might have to do something if there's a style guide we need to follow, right? So that's part of the context. You're going to have less decisions to make if you have to follow a style guide. Style guides at this discipline level, so APA, MLA, Chicago, IEEE, there's tons more even. It just depends what industry and company you end up going into. They tend to be more important or used more for like research and conference and industry facing documents. And so if you are gonna, go into like grad school, figure out what style tends to be the norm for your like program. Again, if you're in STEM and engineering, it's probably IEEE. If you're in more of the humanities, it might be MLA or Chicago. If you're more in like social sciences, it's probably going to be APA or MLA. But kind of just figure out which one it might be, and you can start practicing that. The other thing was style guide. Listen, you have been training your whole lives for style guides. There's not really anything specific to it. It's just if you are writing in a context where the style matters a ton, again, you're submitting for research or you're doing something for like a trade publication and people in your industry expect this certain way or type of thing, all you need to do is treat the style guide like an assignment sheet. Right, so all through high school, probably various classes in college, right, you get assignment sheets, and often they might say, okay, it needs to be, X pages and single spaced and do this and do that. That's what a style guide is. Think of it as an assignment sheet and you just kind of follow along. All right. And so again, probably going to happen if you're applying for grants, if you are doing research or you're trying to get something in a very industry focused publication, is where these styles, APA, IEEE, is going to matter more. All right. But more likely, you could end up with a company level style guide. And so with the company level, that's where it's probably going to talk about things like naming conventions, and like the typography that you can work within. So again, if your company has a style guide, treat it like an assignment sheet. There's not anything that's special to it. It's just follow along. So if your company has this and it says, hey, I want you to call us XYZ and use this type of font in this situation, this type of font in this situation, just follow the directions, right? Just make sure that you do that. There's not anything that special to it. It really just goes down to following the directions, just like an assignment sheet. So in this case, this is our coloradosprings.gov style guide. So for people working, at the city web team specifically, right? These are the names that they can use. So anytime they refer to, coloradosprings.gov, these are the options that they are expected to use. So don't say just Colorado Springs or the Springs, right? They want to say the city of Colorado Springs. It's part of branding. And then they have information about, the different text styles, right? So titles and how they want to do the titles. Correct. Don't do this. Headings. Here's how we want, the headings to look with examples. And if your company has a style guide, and you're in a role where it really matters, read the style guide, take notes on it, and then treat it like an assignment sheet and just follow what your company has set forth. If you are starting your own company, you might be good to create a style guide to make sure everything stays consistent, to make sure you know what we want to be called, what our color palette's going to be, with, the specific hex code so everybody gets the color correct, what types of images you might want to use, what types of font. All of that just goes into creating a cohesive brand. So it's just something good to think about. Again, not that special or hard, just treat it like an assignment sheet and follow whatever directions the style guide says to do. All right. Now, when you do have more choice over font, you can download new ones from places like Google Font and Adobe Fonts. Again, if you download new fonts, just be very cognizant of how widespread they are and if they're going to be useful and accessible. But if you go to like Google Fonts and you find one that you like, there's just this download option. Literally download it. It's like a zip file. unzip it, install it onto your computer, and boom, the fonts are going to be there and accessible to you. The main reason I bring up Google Fonts though is because the Google Font team publishes a ton of helpful articles, tools, recommendations. You can kind of stay up to date on the latest news about fonts. So if that's something that you're really interested in, or if you are starting your own company and you're like, I need to find my brand's font, that's where you might go to something like this to help you be distinct and get the theme and the feel that you want for your brand and for your documents. All right, now for some more like personal tools that you can use no matter what situation, no matter kind of what context and audience you're going for. And that's just sketching. And there's kind of three different, well, there's even more than three, but kind of three key ways that you might sketch. And we're going to be practicing this sort of skill and strategy of sketching with our whiteboards in workshop, because it is a great way to get our ideas flowing, build up some critical and creative thinking, and figure out what idea is going to work best. So your sketching first might look more like drawing the process. And so you can kind of sketch, okay, here's, the process we need to go, the milestones, the timelines, to help you visualize a project. And then you can also draw out what a page might look like, right? So maybe you actually are designing a poster or a presentation or a slide deck or something, and doing some initial really quick easy sketches of what the slide might look like can be really helpful than just diving right in to PowerPoint and trying to figure it out that way. So think about, what are all the elements on this timeline? What needs to be shown? So consider sketching out any visuals that you're going to be using. Second, you can also sketch what we call a mind map. And mind maps are great for organizing whole papers or really big ideas, because we basically get our main topic and then we write down all these different elements that go into that main topic that we need to show, that we need to know. And then last, what I do a lot, this is, my sketch of this lecture that you just listened to. So I thought about, okay, what are the three areas? Let me think about what, examples, notes to myself. And I like sketching and I like the whiteboard because, it's easier for me to do things like, wait, this has to connect here. I need to move this there, or this all works together. When I can actually write it out by hand versus using, a digital tool. Yes, I could. I know programs that could do this. I could use a whiteboard app. I could use PowerPoint. I could use even Word, but there's some limitations to drawing that way. And it's honestly just faster for me to do it on a whiteboard. And then notice, again, sketching, it's getting your first ideas down. You might notice that we start with concepts, tools, and then choices. I kind of had flipped them. And then as I was building the actual presentation, I decided, no, let's talk about the tools at the end. So with your sketching, what I really want you to think about, this is a tool for the first step. Your sketches should be really fast, rapid ideation, less than 5 minutes kind of per sketch iteration. So it's just, let me get these ideas down. Let me start to visualize it. Don't be afraid to erase. Another reason I want us to practice with whiteboards and using whiteboards is because they are meant to be erased. So it can help us get over that mental block of no, what if I lose my idea? No, erase it, try to come up with a new idea, And, at the end of a couple rounds, you'll have a really good sense of what is then the best idea that might draw from a couple different sketches. And it's just the way to kind of find the best strategy, and it should evolve. All right. So use your whiteboards or a piece of paper to literally, kind of by hand, sketch out your layout for the page, or what symbols you might use, or what information needs to be connected. Do it in a nice visual way so you can quickly see. Don't be afraid to erase or add or circle and move and do arrows. It's all going to be really useful for these very early ideation processes. So that way you don't get stuck in kind of that rhythm of, this is my idea and I'm just going to move forward, because you might miss out on ways that would actually help your readers more or better ideas, right? So I don't want you to just forge ahead with the very first thing you think of. I really want you to get used to this kind of sketching stage, this rapid ideation stage of the process, to ultimately make better products faster in the long run. Cool. All right, and then the last tool is going to be that Adobe Color tool. This is color.adobe.com. And it's also linked, of course, in this way for you. And so this tool helps you both pick out color palettes. So if you don't have a style guide that you have to work off of, and you get to pick your own colors and palettes, this is a great way to get colors that are going to like look good together, work good together, aesthetically, visually. But then they also have these accessibility tools to pay attention to. And so with this accessibility tool, you can check both the contrast ratio, and it will literally tell you, hey, these two colors blend in too much. They don't have high enough contrast, like pick a different color basically. So that's really, really helpful. And then there's also a colorblind safe checker that kind of simulates. So in this example, we have a monochromatic palette. That just means it's the same base color, but changes to the tone, shade, hue. Basically, how much white, black, and gray you're adding into that base color changes the kind of palette that you get. And we can kind of see as it starts to simulate the colorblind that even though these are distinct colors, they really start to blend together. So if I was using this color palette for things like a pie chart, this is why it'd be really, really hard or like harder for somebody that has color blindness to actually see, you know, the difference between some of these color choices here. And so that can also be really, really great. Just kind of check and make sure that you aren't like duplicating basically a color, as well as why we want to use more than just color to show those distinctions. So we'll play around with this tool in workshop, play around with it on your own, and just kind of see, you know, what colors are working well together and what colors are not. All right, you made it. Great job, associates. So quick recap. The most important concept to remember, right? The concepts, we went over a lot of them, but the most important thing is that we want to show different pieces of information to the reader, right? So make sure they can find the different pieces of information. We do that with things like proximity, things that are close together, show a connection. We do that with contrast, making sure they're distinct, repetition, to have nice chunks and flow, so people can filter the info that they want. Then we have a lot of choices that we can make. We touched on just some core ones to help any writer improve their documents a little bit more. But all of our choices have to go back to our base camp: context, audience, message, and then the final product or medium we're working within. And make sure all of your choices make it very easy to scan and easy to read for the audience, right? It's not about what you want to do. It's about what the audience is going to need, and it's about increasing the likelihood that they will actually read and understand your stuff. And then last, right, we have a lot of tools. We just went over again, just some core ones to help any writer, but there's a bazillion tools out there. I'm a big fan of exploring and finding new tools, so definitely play around. That's totally fine and great with me. And the biggest tool that I really, really want you to think about, though, is your tool of sketching, all right? So find ways that you can sketch out your ideas. Sketching should be quick and fast. Don't be afraid to erase your early sketches to find better ideas, better ways to organize, and then move forward with your sketch into whatever kind of medium and program that you're using to also speed up that creative process. All right, associates, thank you for tuning in on this just lecture about kind of basics for design and organization. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.